Hola chicas, en esta lección les voy a dar las terminaciones de el tiempo imperfecto y también voy a enseñarles mi monstruo y ustedes van a crear un monstruo ficticioso, un monstruo que no existe. Y van a usar el monstruo para practicar el imperfecto. Lo explico luego, ¿ok? Primero es necesario darles las terminaciones de los verbos, ¿ok? El tiempo imperfecto es un tiempo en el pasado. El pretérito está en el pasado también. Pero el imperfecto es usado para explicar o para comunicar used to. So anytime somebody used to do something, or if somebody always would do something, if they did something several times when they were younger. I went to my grandma's a lot. We're not talking about a certain number of times. We're not talking about a certain time the person went to their grandmother's. But if they went to my grandmother's like all the time, that's something that would be translated in the imperfect. Okay? So it's used to describe a chunk or period of time where things always would happen. It could be used to describe one particular time if you zoom in, right? Because this is how we would graph the preterite, right? But if you zoomed in on that dot, zoomed in, so imagine here, we're on a phone, zooming in, and it would start to look like this, right? One dot, but now you've zoomed in so much, right? Okay, if you zoom in on that one thing, now you could start saying like, while I was doing that thing. That's another way to use the imperfect. So you could use the imperfect to talk about one particular event, but it's while you were doing it. If something else happened during that time. Okay, so we'll get a whole bunch of examples of these. All right, so the imperfect tense is actually very easy. With the preterite, you had to learn AR endings, then you had to learn ER-IR endings, then you learned that there were a bunch of irregulars. The imperfect is super easy, so I'm going to give you these verbs for your notes. First thing I'd like you to have in your notes is the title, the graph, again, showing how preterite or how imperfect could be used. Show a preterite on there too, though, and then show one event during something happened during that time. That's another way to use the imperfect. So we would use the imperfect for this, the imperfect for this, but we'd use the preterite for that, and if we would also use the preterite for this little tiny dot here. If it's one particular thing that happened during some other event while it was happening. Okay, so make sure you have all of that. You can pause the video if you need to, and then have some chart set up for your AR verbs and your ER-IR verbs. Okay, for AR verbs, your endings are going to end in aber. Abas, and then aba again. So this is going to be a little different. The yo form and the el-ea usted form are going to be identical in the imperfect. That's going to be the case over here too. Aba, abas, aba. Abamos con acento sobre la a. Abais, aban. Aba, abas, aba. Abamos, abais, aban. Y para los verbos er e ir, las terminaciones son ia, ias, ia otra vez, íamos, iais, ian, y todas las terminaciones tienen un acento sobre la i, above the I. Unos ejemplos. De niño, De niño means as a child, of child. That kind of means as a child. De niño, yo comía cereal todos los días. Comer es un verbo er, comer, er, así que yo comía. De niño yo comía cereal todos los días. Cuando era joven, when I was young, cuando era joven, yo siempre escuchaba música latina. Yo siempre escuchaba música latina. Si quieres una pregunta, ¿qué comías cuando, we'll take era, cuando eras joven? ¿Qué comías cuando eras joven? Y yo quiero que ustedes escriban 10 frases que usan los verbos imperfectos. 10 frases en sus cuadernos, por favor, que usan los verbos imperfectos. Y vamos a practicar. Now, you don't have to worry with the imperfect about whether a verb is going to be irregular or not. Like, if you pick out a verb, is that verb going to be irregular, or am I going to be wasting my time or practicing the wrong thing? That's because there are exactly 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect, and one of them barely counts as irregular. And I'm going to show you what they are right now. So when we teach the imperfect, I can teach the imperfect in one day. I don't have to give the AR verbs and ER-IR verbs and then practice them, and then a little bit down the road give you the irregulars like I did with the preterite. I don't have to do that because there's exactly 3 and one of them barely counts. So on the next page of your notes, these are the 3 verbs that are irregular in the imperfect. Okay, and here they are. The verb ser, era. So you think of like an era, was, right? Era, eras, era, and these are going to be the same, the yo form and the la usted form. Son iguales, son iguales. Okay, ir, iba, ibas, iba, íbamos, íbamos, ibais, iban, éramos, erais, eran. So these are the 2 real irregular ones. There, veía, veías, veía. And you might be thinking, well, that looks pretty regular to me. Well, technically, if you take the ER ending off, the stem of ver should be just the letter V, and then it should be via, vias, via. But because we keep the E with it, veía, veías, it technically is irregular. And so that's why this one barely counts. That's kind of what you would say on accident, right? So let's finish it out. Veíamos, veíais, veían. And I kind of already used era on the last page. I said, cuando era joven, when I was young, yo siempre escuchaba, ¿y qué comías cuando eras joven? Oops, can't see that. Cuando era joven, yo siempre escuchaba música latina. ¿Qué comías cuando eras joven? So I already kind of used the word era. Okay. So what I would like you to do, and this is not your homework, I have a separate homework assignment for you, but here in class, what I would like you to do is take a few moments and write down a few examples of some sentences that use some of these words. One thing that you're going to probably want to do often is you're probably going to want to use the verb ser with another verb because saying when I was young kind of makes it a used to, kind of makes it a generally used to happen sort of thing. Or some other ways, if you don't want to conjugate two verbs in the imperfect, you could always use siempre, always, like yo siempre did something, I always did something, because that's another kind of indicator for the imperfect. All right, you don't need to do a new set, still keep your 10, okay? So what I'm going to have you do is just kind of use, let's see, I want to give you a number here. So write 10 sentences. Let's say 5 of them have to include an irregular. Whether that's the only one or whether it's an irregular with some other verb. 5 sentences at least include an irregular verb from the other page. An era is a good one to use, era, eras, era, but try to include iba too. Okay? So make your own, but I'm going to give you one more. Yo siempre iba a la clase de español tarde. Or iba tarde. Right, would be better. Yo siempre iba tarde a la clase de español. Or you could say, make them a variety of things too. So ellos siempre iban tarde a la clase de español. So that would be another one. All right. Now, what's this animal all about? So, attached to your Google Classroom lesson, where you found this video and where I've pointed you to, you're going to find a list of some animal features. Things like scales, horn, tail, claws, and things like that. So all sorts of different animal parts. Hair, scales, and feathers, so things that cover a part of a body, but also the parts themselves, like legs and tails and things like that. So you could have a hairy tail, you could have a scaly tail, you could have a feathery tail, you could have all sorts of combinations. So all of that vocab, I'm going to provide to you on a list. Now, this isn't really about learning that vocab. Okay, that's not the important part. The important part is practicing the imperfect. So what are you going to do? You're going to use that vocab to design a monster. Ustedes van a diseñar, van a crear un monstruo ficticioso que no existe. Es un monstruo original. Si tú quieres que tu monstruo tenga aletas o alas, es tu decisión. ¿Okay? Una cola larga, de diferentes colores, ustedes pueden decidir esto. Pero ustedes van a escribir cuáles son las partes del cuerpo. Mi monstruo tiene un cuello largo con escamas. ¿Qué son escamas? Escamas o scales. Tiene un pico amarillo y un cuerno. ¿Y cómo vamos a practicar el imperfecto así, con esos monstruos? ¿Cómo? Bueno, se lo explico. I'll explain it to you. Se lo explico. Estos monstruos estos monstruos están extintos. están extintos. Eso significa que los monstruos vivían, you see what I'm doing there? Vivían, they lived, hace muchos años. Y ustedes van a crear los monstruos, pero van a explicar usando el imperfecto, van a explicar cómo se veían, what they looked like, right? Cómo se veían. That's an imperfect and a reflexive, right? Ustedes van a explicar cuáles acciones hacían, what they did. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my monster, and I'm going to use this pitch timer to count the number of imperfects that I use. And what I want you to do is practice telling about your monster, what it was like in the imperfect. Okay? And so all you're going to do here is sit back and listen. You're going to recognize the verb stem, the stems, right? The stem of the verb that tells you the meaning. All right? So, mi monstruo se llama, becomes se llamaba, right? Mi monstruo se llamaba el Picaccio nadante. El Picaccio nadante. El Picaccio nadante tenía un pico amarillo y comía peces morados. También el Picaccio nadante tenía un cuerno y tenía pelo azul. El Picaccio nadante would become vivía en Antártida. Vivía en Antártida. Tenía una cola larga y marrón y tenía aletas, 2 aletas grandes y 2 aletas pequeñas y con pelo por todo su cuerpo. Tenía un cuello largo con escamas y mi animal vivía en... Oh, I already said that. Vivía en Antártida. Mi animal buscaba peces para comer y nadaba muy rápido porque tenía 4 aletas y una cola larga. Okay, and so as you can see, I used 11 imperfect verbs. One thing that I didn't do very well, though, is that I didn't use too many irregulars. I might want to add some more here. So I might say, el Picaccio nadante era muy pequeño. No era grande. And what else could I say? Oh, durante el invierno, el Picaccio iba a Sudamérica. Pero en el otoño iba a Antártida de nuevo. Se veía muy raro porque tenía un pico y aletas y escamas y todo eso. All right, so I used 16 imperfect verbs. What we're going to do is we're going to display our monster, and you will not have to memorize the parts of the body. I don't want you to worry about doing that. What I want you to focus on is the imperfect tense. And so that is your homework for tonight. Your classwork for today is to write those sentences and make sure that that is done. If it doesn't get done, it will become homework, the 10 sentences, but I think you can get that done in class. Your homework will be just to have the monster done and labeled. And again, the list is provided for you on the Google Classroom, so you don't have to worry about those. All right. Once you're done with your monster, even though just creating it is your homework, but you can maybe start to practice a verbal telling of the imperfect verbs. And we're going to be doing some practice with those as well. All right, and at some point, it will be a quiz to stand up and just verbally tell us about it. You'll be able to be looking at your monster. You'll have all the words, so all you'll need is, okay, how do I say have? Tenea or tenia. The monster tenia pelo morado, or marron, rather. Okay, so it should be pretty easy. Let me know, though, if you have any questions, even though I'm not here, checking my email.